Blog Talk Radio.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At CounterRacism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by CounterRacism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Greetings, context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and Justice, in to share constructive information about racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This is our second program today. We are definitely on the counter-racist grind on Saturday, April 17th. Hope you all were able to check out the first program, Dr. Martin Kevorkian and Mr. Khalid Patterson. Excellent information as usual, both of them making their third trip to the cows, all about films, real interesting information and views on Hurt Locker, Inglourious Bastards, Avatar, District 9. Very informative. I'm saying that because I didn't do a whole lot of talking, so it's not like I'm blowing up anything I said, but I think they have a lot of great information, and I hope people are able to check out that broadcast. Hopefully this will be the second constructive broadcast of the day. Our guest for program number 2, as you all know, I was just at the White Privilege Conference in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Did, I believe, 5 broadcasts while I was there. Shared my views on what went down at the conference. While I was there, I met a white man, and we actually we participated in a workshop together on profiting from privilege, talking about such wonderful humanitarians such as Dr. Peggy McIntosh and Tim Wise, and what are the complications of these folks getting a nice big fat check for the work that they do against racism. And we ended up sitting around and talking for several hours, actually. Very informative. I thought he had a lot of constructive information, some just very unique views on white supremacy, and privileged to have him on the program. He said he'd be willing to come and chat with us. He even suggested perhaps we could do a workshop next year at the White Privilege Conference. If that happens, like I said, make sure you're in Minneapolis next April if that goes down. But I guess he has been doing work on racism, white supremacy for some time, and he can give you more information about his background. Mr. Zack Casey. Mr. Casey, are you with us?
I'm here if you can hear me.
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Right on.
Outstanding. Thank you for sharing some of your Saturday afternoon with us. Very much appreciate your time. If you could, I guess, tell our listeners just a little bit of background information, just in terms of who you are, and just a brief summary, and then we can hop right into it.
Sure. I'll locate myself. I believe you've already said this, but I am a white man, and I'm a teacher, educator, and PhD student at the University of Minnesota. Engaged. Essentially, my sort of animating research projects are critical whiteness studies and education. trying to locate anti-racist work in educational pedagogical spaces. In that work, I've taught a few different courses at the university level, both for pre-service and in-service teachers, around issues of racism, white supremacy, and schools.
Okie dokie. I think the listening audience, just to let you know, as I said, I spoke with this gentleman for several hours at the White Privilege Conference. I think you will be in for a treat. But, be critical, scrutinize what's said. You can call in and ask your own questions. What have you. Phone line is 347-215-6071. I want to hop right into things. You've already said you are a white man. Is that correct?
I am.
Okay. This program, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy, and the definition that I use for both racism and white supremacy is as follows. A global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
I certainly think such a system exists. As far as the definition, I suppose I would want to add to that dedicated to the dehumanization of people of color takes many forms, and the conscious acts and the unconscious acts of white people certainly contribute to that global domination. I'll absolutely agree with that. I think it is important too, though, to note that there are certainly folks who did not author this system, who benefit from this system, who participate in the system, and very likely do not know that they are participating in this system. And I do think that's important to sort of point out from the get-go.
And the importance of pointing that out is?
The hegemonic character of white supremacy and global white supremacy, that the salience of race in a global context, sort of the only way that a global system of white supremacy, I feel, can exist to the extent that it does, requires that not all white folks be able to name the system that they're in. Part of the ongoing oppression of people of color is white folks not being able to name the system in which they live and benefit from.
If I can make a request, because we talked about this, if you could lower the vocabulary level a little bit, that would be helpful for the non-white people that I hope are tuning in. Just a little bit, that would be helpful.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Very interesting. I guess at this point, my view, I think that the people who are most ignorant about this system that we're in, the system of white supremacy, and most unable to name that system would be the victims of white supremacy, the non-white people. Do you think that's accurate?
To an extent, I think so. I think sort of what I mean by the inability to name the system, I actually think very few people of color would be unable to name white supremacy as a global system that they are forced to confront every day. I suppose I qualify or sort of bring up the issue of white folks, of some white folks' lack of knowledge awareness. I certainly don't want to excuse that. It's ignorance is always a choice. So I certainly want to make that clear. And in terms of if it's a question of the greater victim of white supremacy, absolutely it's people of color. But again, I'm fairly confident that the only way for the system to continue is for white folks to not be able to fully make sense of the system in which we live. And that lack of sense making, I think is sort of essential for white folks to move in the world the way so many of us do.
Very interesting. Again, our guest, Mr. Zack Casey. I did catch that. I'm trying to be on my grind even for show number 2. He did say fair. I try to be very attentive to the use of the term fair. I think that has a lot of racist implications in the system of white supremacy, particularly when fair gets associated with legitimacy, accuracy, justice. I think that's it's just a very racist term. It's part of the way racism, white supremacy is embedded in the structure and the way that we think and express ourselves in this system. So I try to be attentive to that. And also, I have concluded white people, I've heard this a lot, that white people are ignorant, and that's an essential aspect of racism. I have concluded white people have to be informed enough to know that they are white, informed enough to know who is not white, and how they are supposed to relate to individuals who are not white as a white person. I think every white person is mandated to know at least that much about the world in which we exist, and if you know that much, you can consciously practice racism, white supremacy as a white person. What I just said, is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And again, ignorance is a choice, and that choice is certainly something that comes with being white in a white supremacist society. I'd absolutely agree with what you just laid out there.
Ruby. My co-host is here as well, Justice. She's a non-white female, and she will have some questions as well. I will see if she has any questions for Zack Casey. If she does, go right ahead. You can ask your questions.
How did you learn to practice racism and white supremacy better?
Sorry, the last word there was better?
Yes.
How did I learn to practice racism and white supremacy better? I'm a little confused on the question. I suppose a way to get into this is how did I learn to practice white supremacy and racism? Maybe I can start there.
Yes.
Okay. I think growing up as so many of us do in the United States, I grew up in a very segregated community, almost all-white town, to white parents with an almost all-white family, extended family, and in so doing, and growing up in that environment, racism and white supremacy is part and parcel to being white. In other words, to be white is to be a white supremacist. In terms of how I learned that, through a variety of places, through interactions, through moving in the world, especially in a white male body, the ways in which people reacted to me, the ways in which I learned to carry myself. Sort of all of these things are reinforcing and sort of this meaning-making process of what it means to be white. To address specifically white supremacy and racism, white supremacy and racism are maintained through a system of advantages put on and given to white people moving in the world. And those learned behaviors become internalized as habits. There's some work now around unconscious habits white racial privilege. Sort of the learning process of becoming white happens very early for white people, to the extent that moving in the world in racist ways becomes second nature, becomes something white people don't even have to think about. And I am certainly no exception to that.
What do you say and do to practice racism and white supremacy every day?
What do I say and do to practice every day? You know, to name specific examples is challenging for me as part of my indoctrination into this system. But to sort of move into that, living in a global system of exploitation, specifically of exploitation of people of color. You know, as I move in the world, and the example I've used before, if I go to Starbucks and I buy an Ethiopian blend, regular sized coffee, in purchasing that coffee, I am participating in the global system of white supremacy in terms of the people of color who were exploited in order to bring this coffee to this place in this city so that I might buy it. Just in buying that, I am participating in this system of white supremacy. And in a capitalist system, in a globalized economy, I participate in white supremacy and help to maintain, am complicit in white supremacy daily as I move in the world.
That'll be all for now.
Alrighty. Again, if you could lower the vocabulary level, I think that could be one way that white people are trained to practice racism, white supremacy in terms of language. And we discussed this at the conference, but I think that's one thing white people could do if they are interested in working against racism, white supremacy, to really make sure when they communicate with non-white people that they speak in such a manner that the non-white people can understand them. So lower your vocabulary.
Yeah, and I will try to do that. I think part of my work as a white person to try and read myself into work on whiteness, on white supremacy, and also my location within higher education. For the most part, the words I'm learning here are things that I've picked up, things that I've read, and because I come from a sort of a more theoretical background in terms of thinking about white supremacy than in the lived and felt way. Much of the words that I use to explain that come from that work, which I don't disagree that certainly is a part of white privilege, white supremacy, and white ways of speaking and being. So I will try, but thank you for calling me on it.
No problem. No problem. I'll try and prompt you if I feel like you might be losing some of us. I guess to start with, we talked about this at the conference. Do you think it is possible in a system of racism, white supremacy, for a white person to not be racist?
I think my simple answer to that is no, but I'd like to sort of unpack that or explain that further. The history around how the term white even came into usage as a racial categorization comes from colonial Virginia, and we're talking right around the year 1700 or so, and indentured servants, European indentured servants, indentured slaves, and black slaves joining forces to undermine white elites to undermine their colonial masters. And there was a need at that point on behalf of the elite to create a differentiation, to create a difference between their white slaves and servants and their black slaves and servants. The logic being, if white elites could convince poor whites, could convince servant whites to think like them, to be like them, to consider themselves like these white elites, that the system to maintain slavery and to maintain the oppression of people of color would be all the easier. I think time and history has proved that theory correct. So traced in that way, if white literally harkens back to this creation to differentiate, this creation to make two sets of folks who are working in bondage different from one another, if that's what white means, then quite literally to be white is to be a white supremacist. And as I work through that, to call yourself white, to harken back to that definition, to that distinction, does make one a white supremacist. Another sort of piece of history to this, European immigrants, as they came to the United States, the vast majority were not white when they arrived. There's a lot of historical work around various ethnic groups. The Irish stand out for me in this work in terms of the story of how these European ethnic groups became white. One of my favorite writers, Sandica, a woman of color, has this theory around sort of how Europeans became white required a giving up, a dehumanizing, but more or less sort of giving up cultural ways of being, ethnic ways of being, things retained from their countries, from the places that they were from, giving those things up in order to become white in the United States. That process of becoming white, that what we're giving up as white people in becoming white is what makes us white supremacists. And in that construction, that's where I feel justified in saying that to be white is to be a white supremacist, and therefore to be white is to be racist. All white people, and maybe to qualify that more, all white adults are white supremacists. Did my phone cut out?
No, I muted myself. My apologies. I wanted to address your qualifier, and this will be me killing two birds with one stone. One of our listeners, a non-white female, she was listening to the broadcast live from the White Privilege Conference, and she heard some of the dialogue. Not that much. I just teased them a little bit that we were sharing at the conference, and she said, well, can a white baby be racist? Since, all white people are racist, can a white baby be racist? What would your response to that be?
Well, first, white supremacy is learned. Whiteness is learned. White people have to learn how to be white, what it means to be white. So a baby, if we're imagining, a white baby who is a newborn, is a baby born a racist. No, my answer to that would be no. In terms of how early racism is learned, though, how early the indoctrination of white people begins can be very early. So a baby lacking lacking verbal ability, if a baby can't speak, it's hard. It's kind of hard to imagine, then sort of calling this baby who can't speak a racist. However, race is internalized very early on, and we can imagine, white, very young white children pointing out people of color, asking their parents about them, playing on sort of things that they've seen, conversations they've overheard, learning how it is that they are supposed to interact with people of color, and internalizing racist beliefs very early on. And so in that way, a white baby I would hesitate to call racist, but very young white people, yes.
When we spoke on the phone, you said, well, no, white infants cannot be racist, but certainly toddlers can be.
Toddlers certainly certainly could be.
I'm going to play advocate, the non-white adversary, if you will. So if white infants cannot be racist and racism, white supremacy has to be learned, does that invalidate your statement that it is impossible to be white and to be a racist?
I don't think so, because of so if we're part of this work is that there is no biological science to race. That is, scientifically, race doesn't exist sort of in this the word I want to use is biologistic, but the biology of race is a myth, is a 19th century white supremacist scientific myth. Which means that racial identities and what it means to live those out, to act white, has to be learned. The question of how early that learning goes on, how early white people learn to be white, can happen very early. And in that way, I don't think it contradicts the statement that to be white is to be a white supremacist. In some ways, we can imagine a white newborn almost being pre-white or not white yet, maybe framed that way. But to become white in a white supremacist society is to be a white supremacist.
Very interesting. I hope the person who asked that question, Cree, counter-racist evolving engineer, she has her own program here at Blog Talk Radio. She might call in for clarification if she's listening in. I guess, okay, I want to pair these two together. So if it's impossible to be a white person and not be a racist white supremacist, and becoming white means becoming racist white supremacist, we spoke at the conference about how non-white people are conditioned to seek out the impossible, that is, a white person who is not racist. Can you kind of share your thoughts on that?
I think, and I think this stems back to a lot of the work around internalized racism in some contexts, but also, the continued maintenance of a white supremacist culture, the desire, I think, and the felt need for people of color to find, quote unquote, good white people, is the insurmountable challenge that is then posited if all white people are racist. If racism is located and even extending out from that, racism lives in systems. Racism lives in structures. The burden then on people of color is unimaginable. The need for good white people is felt in the extent that in order to move in the world, in order to imagine an existence outside of and separate from white supremacy, if white people by definition are white supremacists, it means that white people are so involved, so enmeshed in white supremacy, that the idea of people of color sort of working with white folks in that way becomes as I've characterized it, an impossible task. And as you said, the need for good white people, I think, is felt in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people of color have white people in their lives who they consider, who they consider to be good people, and I'm certainly not willing to concede that there is nothing of value, nothing of worth in white people. How could I sort of be in this role? But with that, the need for good white people is felt by both white people and people of color. I think that work, though, is holding us up. This idea that it's not all white people, the idea that it's not whiteness as an idea even that is maintaining white supremacy, prevents us from actually dismantling it, from actually taking steps to radically transform a white supremacist society.
Okay. Wow. Can you, I guess, if you have knowledge about that conditioning process, if you could maybe give us some examples that you think speak to non-white people being conditioned to kind of seek out these good white people. And I think I just want to be clear, when I say good white person, I mean a white person who is not a racist white supremacist.
I think, examples of that conditioning. Again, it's difficult for me to, and I really hesitate to try and speak, for people of color on this. And
just if you can speak as an admitted racist white supremacist, just to ways that you see this play out, where you see non-white people, as honest as we can bear. This is very important. If you can just pick out some ways where you see non-white people doing things that would suggest they're hunting, searching, needing for there to be that white person or people who are not racist.
The easiest place for me to go is to think about teachers. So if we know, around 85% of teachers in the United States are white, and we know that schools today are more segregated than they were before the passage of Brown versus the Board of Education. There are many white teachers of students of color, and it's not hard to imagine a parent needing to believe that the people, the adults that they are sending their children to learn, to be educated, are not racist. It's hard to imagine sending a child of color to an institution, to people that we know are white supremacists. And so the need then to sort of invent the need to have these good white people, then the need to have white people who are not racist, the need to have white people who are not white supremacists in schools working with students of color. That's not a hard thing, I don't think, to imagine that need. At the same time, we know in a white supremacist society, positioning schools as, schools maintain society, schools reproduce society. If society is a white supremacist society, part of schools' function then is to reproduce white supremacy, and the ways in which schools do that relies on white supremacist actors like teachers. And that's maybe the closest example I can give. Also, in a romantic relationship, the ability the ability to love a white person, on a person of color who is in love with a white person. It's not hard to, again, it's not hard to imagine that person would need to feel that this person that they love is not a racist. And so this sort of this conditioning then is all around us, I think, in terms of the need to maintain or the need to protect this idea of this white person who's not a racist, which again, I think so long as we are sort of spending time imagining that fictional white person, we're not going to be able to move from there.
Wow. This is what I was doing at the White Privilege Conference. I was speaking with Mr. Zack Casey during a presentation that I was told was not constructive at all. Thankfully, Mr. Casey was there to save the day, and I did not have to. I didn't have to endure anything that was not constructive. I got to talk to him and get constructive information that I am glad to have the chance to share with you. Actually, I'll back off of that. This might not be constructive. Analyze, scrutinize, come to your own conclusions. The non-white female counter-racist evolving engineer who had that question, she's actually with us. If you would like to get some clarification around your question, your line is open. Please go right ahead.
Mr. Casey, can I be heard?
Yes.
I am that non-white female who wanted clarification on that question. Now, if I understand you correctly, you said that if a white person is young enough, months old, that a person is that young, that it is possible for that person not to be white. Does that also mean it's possible for that person would also have to be non-white, so that we're talking about a person under the system of white supremacy who is neither white nor non-white?
Yes, under sort of this theoretical sort of move that I've made, and like the work, like I said, of Sandika sort of backs this up. White people have to learn to be white, and so in that way, then, this very young white person is sort of caught in this limbo state, of both being of sort of not being white yet, or maybe a better way to put it would be not white enough yet.
Oh boy, I have heard nothing except for the initials with something about Sandika. I don't know which one are yours.
Zack Casey. Mr. Casey, are you?
Sorry, things are really breaking up here. I can't really hear.
Okay. I heard him clearly.
I can't hear you either, Gus.
Okay.
Gus, I heard you there. Are we back on here?
I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Okay.
And I can hear the both of you now.
Okay.
All right, now I can hear you. So, sorry, I couldn't really make out any of your response there to what I just said.
We did not hear any of what you just said, so if you could start from the beginning with your response to her question, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so the question I was responding to was sort of this question of a non-white or not yet white, sort of very young child of white parents. And my response was that sort of rather than sort of positioning that person as non-white, I think a better way to think of it would be not yet white, or maybe even better, not white enough. That is, learning what it means to be white. There is this time involved for white people. We can't be born white supremacists. We have to learn it, and if we have to learn it, then again, a white child of white parents, I'd be hard pressed to not call that baby white. But again, sort of with this framework of white meaning white supremacist, the white meaning racist, then that white child is not white enough yet for white society, for their white parents, and the child then undergoes sort of this process of figuring out what it means to be white and the things that structure or sort of govern what this person needs to do to move in the world and be white, to be accepted by its white family, by its white peers, by white institutions and white society.
Okay, so let me see if I'm clear. Would it be accurate to say that what you're saying is that white enough equals white supremacist? That the term white enough equals white supremacist?
Yes.
So that the baby is white, but the baby is not a white supremacist? Is that the logic?
Yes, and again, sort of this is where this is I suppose where I run into trouble. But again, whiteness as an idea, whiteness as this identity that is taken up, that is learned. No, we can't. I mean, just the simple answer to your question then is yes. White babies are not born racist.
Okay. I really thank you for the simplicity of that answer. That was extremely helpful. So that there is at least one category of white people who you would say are not white supremacists. And that
yes.
would be very, very young babies.
Yes.
Okay, I have one more question regarding that, which is, would you agree with the following statement? That any white person who is able to practice white supremacy does practice it?
I would, and I think we especially sort of move into trouble there when we imagine or think about white anti-racist folks or white people that are engaged in anti-racist struggle. A friend of mine actually had a great line on this recently. She said that white people are constantly white anti-racist folks are constantly enacting white privilege, even as they seek to dismantle it, as part of being white in this society.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you see, or I'll just ask, is there a value, I guess, to just making that blanket statement to equate being white with racist white supremacists?
To me, I see the value there in sort of accomplishing a few things. There's a very, I think, overly simplistic way that many people, and I'm willing to say that I think this is likely more white people than people of color, but tend to situate and understand racism and white supremacy in individuals as an opinion and sort of solely in acts. So we can think of this, when somebody says something racist, right, and moves around the differences between saying something racist and being racist. To me, what situating whiteness as white supremacist does to this argument is it means that racist statements are evidence of larger, as you put in the opening, global system of white supremacy, and these times when it's made so explicit in language or in acts, that's not the limit. That's not the scope of racism. It's just a sort of a very, very visible, explicit sort of evidence of this much larger, much broader system. And so what I think the value in positioning and making the statement to be white is to be a white supremacist is that it gets at these larger structural systems that maintain oppression and actually get us out of this very simplistic, individual actors are racist, not institutions, not systems.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Again, pitching as much honesty as we can bear. As much honesty as we can bear. I told you about that question before the program. As I said, this question was asked a week ago. And you gave your response today, gave your response on the phone. Same response. And I said, do you think non-white people searching for or even inquiring about whether a white baby or a white old person could be an illustration of non-white people's need to find a white person that is not racist? And your response was, or you can just give it to us now, what would your response be to that?
So I understand the question. Sort of, you're asking me what do I think it means that the question of if a baby, if white babies are not born racist, if that is part of the search of people of color to find non-racist white people?
Do you think yes? Do you think that could be yes?
I do think that could be, but I also don't think that's incorrect. I don't think that's inaccurate. I think what that points to is the possibility for change, however far off and unimaginable as it seems. The point that white people are not born racist, the point that it is learned, means that there is potential to learn other things, to learn other ways of being. Now, as we exist in a global system of white supremacy, it's for me, and I won't speak for everyone on this, but for me, it is impossible for me to imagine in this global society to not learn to be white if you are born with white skin, especially in the United States. And in that way, sort of the fact that white babies are not born racist means that there is potential that they won't be racist, sort of if we're imagining that. But in a white supremacist society, as I've said before, they will be, or they will become white.
Okay. I just want to share. Actually, I want to make sure I get this clean and question. Do you think non-white people, victims of white supremacy, who inquire about whether or not a white baby and or a white elderly person can be a racist, do you think that could be a part of the conditioning that non-white people get to search for a white person that is not racist? Your response was?
Possibly.
You broke up at the beginning. Could you start that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my response was that it is possibly animated by that, right? That wanting to find this non-racist white person can be part of that conditioning. At the same time, I don't think it's inaccurate. I don't think it's wrong.
I'm not saying it's incorrect.
Right. Okay. So that was If most of what I said got cut off, that's it, sort of the gist of it.
Oh no, we heard everything. I just didn't get like the very first 2 seconds of your response. But yeah, I want to say that for the record. I don't think it's incorrect. You should question everything. I don't see anything incorrect about asking questions and trying to get as much clarity as possible. Nothing incorrect about that. But I do want to take a moment to just kind of restate what has been placed on the table. And you make sure you correct me if I say anything that is not accurate. That you, under the current system of racism, white supremacy, you cannot imagine a white person not being a racist white supremacist as long as this system exists. And though it is possible, white supremacy has to be learned, so it is possible that white infants could be educated in a manner that they would not function as racist white supremacists. However, you do not see, or you don't think it is possible for that to happen as of this moment in time in the system of white supremacy. Am I accurately restating basically what you shared with us?
I would. That is accurate. Yes.
Okay. And I do want to state for the record, because I heard this at the White Privilege Conference more than once, white supremacy is genetic. White supremacy is on a cellular level. That was said at the conference. That was said at the conference even by Dr. Eddie Moore, Jr. He said white supremacy is at a cellular level. And I believe Michael Bradley also has done some work which might suggest that white people practicing racism, white supremacy is a genetic thing. So how do you feel about that? I guess, one, did you hear any of those views presented at the conference? And whether you did or not, you've heard it now.
Well, right, and hearing it now, I suppose I have a couple reactions. I think the metaphor, the place I'd want to go with that is a metaphorical place. All right, so very similar to what I laid out early on around that these sort of patterns and habits of white supremacy get internalized, become second nature to white folks. In that way, sort of imagining that then as a cellular process or as something that lives inside of me, that I'm willing to go to. In terms of a genetic argument, I'll just share a personal, just a very personal belief. I have a very, very difficult time, imagining such a thing as like a racist gene, as if there's something in the cellular makeup of white people that makes them white supremacists. And the case in point is history tells us that almost can't be the case. So especially if I'm thinking about, kind of the story of Irish exploitation by the British. Certainly, I don't think any of us would say that Irish folks aren't white. And if they are white, they had to become white, sort of in this way. If they race as it's currently imagined isn't sort of what we understand race to be now is not what we've always understood race to be. All of these things are situated historically. The Irish used to be a race. German used to be a race. So in that way, sort of trying to make a blanket statement around all white people, there's no way. I can't believe that. And a lot of my work comes out of questioning positivistic science, and I'll just remind us that 19th century scientific racism, they scientifically proved white supremacy and the inferiority of people of color. We know that's bogus science. We know that's made up false science. And I think sort of any attempt to bring us back there isn't useful. I think it's not useful. We don't. There's not a need for that. Even trying to find a racist gene to me feels like we're hearkening back to this era that we've moved out of. Sort of reinvigorating scientific racism. So I don't agree with that.
I think it's important. We're talking about being correct. I do think it's a huge distinction. I think it's large enough that it invalidates the statement that we are going back to a time when science was used to perpetuate racism, white supremacy. At that time, I don't think science was saying that was making any statements about white people that were not glowing, and white people are just the best in the world. Lothrop Stoddard and all these people, they were not saying that there's anything genetically dastardly about white people. I think it's a very different thing to say that, white people might practice this global system of injustice because of something in their genes. Like, I think that's a very different train of thought than what was being expressed in the time of, I guess, the heyday of eugenics and phrenology and all that sort of thing. Unless, I am confused.
So it's social determinism, and this. I feel like we have so many easy examples of how these social deterministic sort of arguments fall on their face. If we think about, it's a very classic debate in education, actually, this nature versus nurture move. Well, I think you make a really important point there that scientific racism did sort of only have glowing things to say about white people then. It's important to note what scientific racism was saying about people who we now call white who weren't white then. All right, things around the intelligence and demeanor and disposition of Irish people, of Italian people, of Greek people, of Jewish people. There's these moves. Whiteness is a social construction, and the idea then that something in our genes leads to behaviors in a system where we have to learn how to operate. We have to learn language at a very minimum here. I just don't. I don't find any use, sort of in exploring, biology to find social linguistic, kinds of processes.
Oh, and I want to make sure I'm being clear for everyone. I'm not saying that I have an opinion either way on white people and any links to them practicing racism, white supremacy being genetic. I don't really have a view on that at all. I'm just it was said repeatedly at the White Privilege Conference by both non-white people and white people. I heard it repeatedly. So it is out there, and other people have come on the program and said the same thing. So it is out there. I don't have a view, but I did want to check, Justice, if you are there and you have some questions you would like to ask Mr. Zack Casey, please go right ahead.
Do you teach other white people to practice racism, white supremacy?
Do I teach them to practice white supremacy? I would actually say I don't have to.
So is it can you answer a yes or a no? Can you say yes or no?
It's hard to just say yes or no, because my knee-jerk reaction is to say no, because the white people I work with have already learned white supremacy. Part of my work with white people is learning and trying to work on ways to challenge white supremacy. So to just make it a yes or no, I'll say no, but it's important to note that I don't have to.
So I'll repeat the question again. Do you teach other white people to practice racism and white supremacy?
No.
Okay, thank you. If so, how?
The if so how piece is almost a different question. So it's white supremacy isn't learned. Well, I shouldn't say is never. For the most part, white supremacy isn't learned in conscious statements. All right, so it's not something where, if you're white, your parents sit you down at some point and explain, this is white supremacy and this is how you have to act and this is what you have to do. While there are certainly stories of that, I think for the vast majority of white people, no one actually sits you down and tells you how to be a racist, how to be a white supremacist. But ways of moving and being in a white supremacist society are constantly teaching other people. Are constantly teaching other people. The way that we learn from others, we're sort of constantly learning from others, and in that way, as a white person, I'm certainly inculcated in sort of the maintenance of white supremacy in a white supremacist system. So do I actively teach white supremacy? No. But is it possible that white people can learn white ways of being from me? Yes.
Okay, do all white people practice racism and white supremacy?
Yes.
That'll be all for now.
Context of white supremacy, justice, Gus T Renegade, and our guest, Mr. Zack Casey. I'll just say, and again, this doesn't mean a hill of beans because the system of racism, white supremacy still exists. But I think just the first hour of our discussion, I think it's at minimum as constructive as anything I heard at the White Privilege Conference. I could be incorrect, but I would put it on par with, unless my memory is failing, and there were some just extraordinary moments that have slipped my mind. I'm going to ask you your views on the White Privilege Conference in a second as well. I guess when we spoke at the conference, you said that you said that non-white people are, I guess, not honest with themselves, and you said it would be overwhelming to be honest about racism, white supremacy, and to be a non-white person and to realize, my gosh, my white neighbor is a racist. My white boss is a racist. Every white person that I'm bumping into, every time something happens, to know, yep, that guy's a racist. He just mistreated me because I'm not white. To be, dating, married to, in a sexual relationship with a white person, yeah, my partner is a racist. That would just be overwhelming for non-white people. Can you kind of talk about that conditioning and how you see non-white people just not being honest about the environment in which we live?
I think it's self-defense and, emotional self-defense. The extent to which, white supremacy sort of exists in and outside of white people. Living in a white supremacist society, and that constant, felt animosity, felt fear, coupled with, as you said, you lay out these these people in white people in the lives of people of color. It's again, as a white person, for me, it's I can't begin to imagine that, and so based on that, there is this need, this defense of sort of emotional sanity to carry on, to keep going in this life, to not think that of all white people. I think about it. Actually, a conversation I was having earlier today. This idea that the racist white people are somewhere else. They're not here, and the people that are maintaining white supremacy and racism, it's none of the white people in the room. It's white people somewhere else. And I think as long as that is the belief, not to say that I don't understand where that belief comes from. And again, I think that belief comes from how completely exhausting and overwhelming it is, or would be, to think that all white people are white supremacists. But I think the only way we can begin to work against this system is to understand its massive, massive scope. And while I don't pretend to have quick fixes or easy answers or anything like that, I do think sort of part of my work here is sort of is understanding the immensity of white supremacy.
Again, our guest, Mr. Zack Casey. Do you think that making the terms white and white supremacy, or white and white supremacist, do you think that aids in conveying the immensity of the system of white supremacy worldwide?
I do. I absolutely do. And also using the language of white supremacy forces this issue. I've made this comment before with students and with friends. The worst name you can call a white person is racist. And understanding why, the insults that do the most harm to us, I think on some level speak to something that we know about ourselves, at least in this case, at least in the case of white people. And in calling a white person a racist, we tease that out. We force white people to think, okay, if I am a racist, or what have I done that someone could consider me a racist? And when we really think about the global exploitation of people of color, there is no way to move in this society as a white person and not actively participate in white supremacy.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Quite a few folks, excuse me, quite a few folks have called in. I'm actually going to go to the phone line early. Go right ahead.
I just got one more, just for just a quick second, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You said other white people can learn white ways of being from you. Can other white people learn you racist, white supremacist ways of being from you?
Could they? Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Did you have some other questions, Justice, or is that all for now?
That's all for now.
That's all for now. Yes, I will. I'll go to the phone lines, and she's 10. She's 10. Justice, brilliant. I will go to the phone lines and get folks if they have questions. See, one person, she's enjoying the show and says she had no questions, which is cool in the gang. No problem there either. I don't know why people. I'll just read it from the text here. Have you considered the possibility that white people are born with racist instincts, just like a person is born with the ability to walk? There you go.
So to me, they're two very, very different kinds of processes. There's really different things going on when I walk, and to keep it sort of on that level, what I say, the meaning of the words I say, the meaning of my actions. In other words, learning to walk is very different than learning what I'm walking on. And so in that way, I mean, have I considered it? I'm considering it right now, but again, I refuse to go to a deterministic sort of place here. Whiteness is learned, and plain and simple. And so no, I do not think white supremacy is born into people like walking.
I'm going to go to the phone line. I'm just pointing this out because you are a racist white supremacist, admitted racist white supremacist, that part of your refusal could be an act of racism. So I do want to make it clear for victims, there are people who do have the view that this is what it is for white people. Practicing racism is like walking for a white person. White people and non-white people have taken this view. As I said, I don't have a view on it. One of those folks has been on this program, though, Michael Bradley. That's one. But it was presented at the conference, and as I said, even Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., who's married to a white person, even he said this. So it is on the table. It is something you should think about, come to your own conclusion. It is on the table, though. It is on the table. And I do think that's accurate. Part of your refusal to go there, that could be, conscious or unconscious, an act of racism. Would you agree?
I suppose it could be, but again, this comes out of sort of a host of things that actually don't pertain specifically to racism that I reject in terms of being determined by biology. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, but you did say it could be, correct?
As a white person, I mean, it's certainly something I have to consider, and my refusal there of in taking this position, yes, could be could absolutely be a part of my internalized whiteness, internalized white supremacy. That said, I am very convinced that white supremacy does not live in genes, that white supremacy does not live in biology, that it lives in ideas and lives in actions and lives in words.
Ruby, I believe that was Cree's question, by the way. If she would like to clarify, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think the reason I posed the question, Mr. Casey, is because I think I heard you give two inconsistent responses. I think when I asked you whether or not all white persons were white supremacists, you told me no. But then I believe I heard you respond to the same question when Justice posed it to you as, yes, all white persons are racist. Now, if the latter is true, well, let's say that your proposition that racism, that all white persons are racist. It would seem to me that the only way that that could be true would be that they are born with that predisposition. And it also doesn't seem to me, well, let me stop with that. Does that seem logical to you?
Well, the problem we run into here, I think, is when I say white people, I'm not thinking about sort of what we laid out earlier in terms of babies, in terms of newborns. So if I'm being inclusive of newborn babies, then again, to be consistent in my answers, no. But I don't think. Given kind of this question of whether or not white supremacy lives in genes, whether it lives in biology, I see the relevance to this question here, absolutely, and I thank you for pointing that out. But my response to justice is informed in my framing of white adults, and so I will do better in the future to qualify and clarify this. And I'll just do it now. All white adults are white supremacists, but not all white people, with the caveat that it is learned very early.
Would you be willing to even further clarify that statement or further hone it by saying all white persons over the age of, can you give me an age?
I hesitate to, because I think it's different, and I haven't, I've certainly, never done my own study of very young white people to sort of pinpoint when they're making racist moves. But to be safe, and if I have to give a number, let's go with 12.
Okay. Now, I just have one further question at this time, which is, I want to be clear. I may have missed this because I didn't tune in for the first 20 minutes. But did you define racism as an action or as a thought, belief, feeling? Which one?
Both. I think it's for me sort of all of the above. Racism lives in language, lives in thoughts, and also lives in actions. Racism is a global structural system in which that people take up, enact, and are influenced by in their actions, in their speech, in their thoughts.
I would have a question later on, but I know there are other folks who have questions right now, Gus.
Okay. I'll hit the phone lines. I'm just going to pitch my question one more time. If you could indulge me with just a yes or no, that would be great. The non-white people who inquire about whether or not white babies and or white elderly people may not be racist white supremacists, could that be part of the conditioning that non-white people get to search for a white person that is not racist?
I will say yes, it could be, but I don't think it's inaccurate. I think it's an important sort of question to keep posing. Well, yeah.
Okay. And I'll say again as well, I don't think there's anything incorrect about searching for clarity, asking questions, question everything. Let's see. Going right down the line. Somebody called in at 111. Don't know. Oh, Justice, if you have a question.
Yes. Do you like to live in a system of racism and white supremacy?
Do I like living in a system of racism and white supremacy?
Yes.
No, I do not. I think I think that. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that living in a white supremacist society dehumanizes white people. That I am literally missing part of my authentic self in being white in a white supremacist society.
How do you think you would feel once the system of racism and white supremacy is eliminated?
How do I think I would feel?
Yes. No. How do you think? How do you think you would feel once the system of racism and white supremacy is eliminated?
Because I don't know what would have to happen to have that take place. It's hard to know, but I want to. I right now. I think I would feel a lot more human than I do right now. I think I would be able to connect with people in a way that I feel like I actually can't right now.
Okay, that'll be all for now.
Okay.
Person who called in at 111, 111, if you have a question for Mr. Casey, your mic is open. Are you just listening, 111? Okay, I will assume they are listening. Last four digits, 2009. Last four digits, 2009. Your mic is open. If you have a question, go right ahead.
Hello, Gus. Just calling in. I got a two-part question. First part of my question is to your guest. Do you think racism, white supremacy is evil? And if so, do you think white people that are practicing racism, white supremacy, is doing it for self-preservation?
The first respond is white supremacy and racism evil. I think yes, unequivocally, yes, racism and white supremacy are evil. No question there. The question of if I think white people are practicing white supremacy as a means of self-preservation, a simple answer to that is yes. But I think it gets messier when we think about what it is that in practicing white supremacy and racism, what are we preserving? I think part of learning white supremacy, and this is all tied up in notions of nationalism and where we're from and things like that. Is this idea that without white supremacy, if we weren't exploiting people around the world, but exploiting people of color, if we weren't doing that, that we couldn't live the way we do. We couldn't have all this stuff that we fill our lives with, that our lives wouldn't be as good if we weren't doing that. And because the answer to the first question is yes, it is evil. We have to then say that that what it is that we are preserving is evil, is founded in evil, is founded in the exploitation and the dehumanization of people around the world, and the maintenance of that for self-preservation. Yes, it is about self-preservation, but I think it's a gross misunderstanding and ignorance to what it is that we are preserving.
Okay.
Groovy. Thank you for calling in, sir. I'll ask a few, and then if we have time, and if I feel like it, we'll take a few more questions, perhaps, before we wrap up. The White Privilege Conference. The White Privilege Conference. I guess this was your first year. It was my first year. Could you share your thoughts on La Crosse, Wisconsin, and the White Privilege Conference?
Yeah, I attended the White Privilege Conference with some trepidation. I was nervous about. I was worried. So there's a way there's a way that I think, especially the term white privilege, comes across that sort of this thing is presented to white people, where it's like redemption, or if they just confess it, that somehow it'll things will be better and they'll be okay. And I think to that extent, if a white person acknowledges their own privilege living in a white supremacist society, or even more broadly, that white privilege exists, that somehow that counts as action, that's the end of the project, when in fact that is just the very, very beginning of dismantling white supremacy. And so that's a fear sort of that I brought with me to the White Privilege Conference. And I think there were elements of the White Privilege Conference that played that out. I think depending on how a person chose to move through that conference, which talks they decided to attend, which sessions they had decided to go to, if they came with a group of people that they already knew, and just moved through the whole conference with them, not talking to anybody else, I think it would be very possible to attend that conference and not move out of that paradigm that I just laid out. That said, I think there were actually, though, sessions, and certainly not as many as I would have hoped for, but there were places I think that were having really meaningful, serious conversations. The session I met Gus in, for example, was on profiting from privilege and questioning what it means that white people have made tons of money writing books and doing talks on their own privilege. What that conversation didn't move into was what who's buying this stuff, and what does it mean that people are buying this stuff, especially if it is white people that are buying these texts. What does that mean? But I think those kinds of questions are really important, and also in my personal experience at this conference, I met people like Gus again, that I was able to have really provocative and interesting and moving conversations. I will share that in my experience at this conference, that was largely with people of color, but certainly two white folks actually stand out from the conference for me as well. And so in that way, sort of what this conference offered up for me that I look to as a positive is the spaces that were created between sessions, after sessions, sort of in moments, sort of unstructured, informal moments, where really serious conversations could happen. And I think, and in listening to Dr. Moore, the afternoon of that last of the last day of the conference, I really think that there's that the folks that are organizing this conference want to move it into this very to a more hard-hitting place to prevent the possibility to move through that conference. Acknowledge white privilege exists and then move on and go about your life.
Did the non-white people that you observed at the conference, did they demonstrate in their conduct that they had an understanding of the immensity of racism, white supremacy, and specifically did they demonstrate an understanding that all of those white people at that conference, all of them are racist white supremacists?
Did all people of color at that conference? No, we're not doing that, or at least weren't saying that in sessions. It's hard. I can't speculate as to what they thought, and certainly as somebody who has been a teacher in classrooms and who has facilitated sessions like the sessions at the White Privilege Conference, it's not hard to imagine that all of people's beliefs aren't present in their talks or aren't present in their presentations. But some people of color at that conference, though, I do think the question of if they carried themselves as if they knew that. I'm not sure exactly what it means to carry yourself knowing that. I don't know that I don't know what that looks like. But there were certainly people of color at that conference that know the immensity of white supremacy. And I'll add there that I'm certainly calling you out there, Gus, as someone who I do think understands the immensity of white supremacy, who was at that conference.
Okay.
How should non-white people behave and or interact with white people for the purpose of replacing white supremacy with justice?
It's again a really hard thing for me to say, and I'm really hesitant to say this is how people of color should behave, or this is how what people of color should do. So rather than answering it that way, I'm going to answer it as maybe as suggestions. And the primary suggestion would be this: racism and white supremacy is a white problem that mandates white people to work against it. And the extent to which people of color can encourage white people to do this work with other white people, to do the work of dismantling racism with white people, is terribly important. It's something that I think people learn as part of becoming white and part of being white is that you're not supposed to talk about race. And that helps protect and maintain white supremacy. So a suggestion for something people of color can do is for the white people in their lives, and especially the white people in their lives who they trust, or possibly who they love, to really encourage them to have serious conversations, to take action with other white people. There is no potential way of overcoming white supremacy if white people aren't doing the work.
I'll go for now.
Okay.
Do you think racism, white supremacy can be replaced if white people do not assist in that process?
No. Well, I mean, assuming white people are still around, no. There's no, not even. I don't even want to go to that place. Unequivocally, racism and white supremacy cannot be replaced without white people taking action to end it.
Because
it's a white problem. It was made by white people for white people, and in that way, it mandates white people to dismantle it, to work against it, to replace it.
I'm just following the logic here. Correct me if I go off track. So if this problem, the problem of racism, white supremacy, can only be solved by white people, and all white people, at least all the ones over the age of 12, I didn't agree to that. I just said all white people are racist, white supremacists. I would just have to conclude white people might not be interested in replacing white supremacy with justice. They might not see white supremacy as a problem. If that's the case, is white supremacy just going to be here forever?
So long as that's the case, so long as white people do not recognize, as one of the callers pointed out, the evil of white supremacy and the extent to which they cannot be fully human and be white in a white supremacist society, so long as that goes on, to step back a little bit. This is in part what I brought up a little while ago, and I certainly don't want to come across as making the claim that it is only white people that can do this work. I would be absolutely incorrect to think that people of color don't have an incredible role to play in import. I mean, one of my favorite writers on whiteness and white supremacy is a history professor named David Roediger. And David Roediger said that the best theorists of whiteness and white supremacy are people of color. To me, what that means is that white people constantly, even and actually not even, especially white people who are engaged in combating racism, in combating white supremacy, absolutely need people of color. If for no other reason than to make sure that those white folks engaged in anti-racist struggle aren't losing sight and aren't getting off track and aren't getting bogged down and aren't playing into their own internalized white supremacist, racist ways of being that absolutely will dismantle and undo this work. If as my colleague said, and as I believe, if white people engaged in anti-racist work are constantly enacting white privilege as they seek to dismantle it, required then to move is the work of people of color. At the same time, people of color struggling on their own cannot overcome white supremacy. The systems and the physical power of white supremacy, it can't happen without overcoming white supremacy and racism. Cannot happen without white people.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thankfully, I don't share that view because I don't believe white people are going to stop practicing racism, white supremacy, whether it's genetic, whether it's learned. It seems like they have found something that they enjoy and are good at. So I don't think they're going to stop. However, I do think non-white people can replace white supremacy with justice, even without their help. And I think it would just be a matter of learning how this system works, what it is, how it works, and then coming up with suggestions that counter that system. But I mean, hey, I don't have any evidence to support this because we haven't done it, so he could be correct. Maybe we aren't going to be able to do this without their assistance. I did want to go back to the White Privilege Conference, and then I had some other folks who wanted to ask questions. I asked about the conduct of the non-white people at the conference and if they demonstrated through their behavior an understanding of racism, white supremacy, and an understanding that even these white people at the conference are racist. I feel like I observed a lot of conduct that would indicate, or at least to me indicated, confusion around that. I mean, even the founder of the conference is married to an admitted racist. I mean, do you see a problem with that? Non-white people being engaged in sexual relationships with racist white supremacists? Do you see a problem with that? Anything incorrect about that?
I mean, incorrect is a hard thing for me to understand. I don't think it's my place to tell people whom they can or can't be in romantic relationships with.
Not saying that you need to tell them who they can or can't be in a relationship with. Just, do you see anything incorrect about a non-white person, a victim of racism, white supremacy, being in a sexual relationship with a racist white supremacist?
Well, I think in that framing, there is a contradiction, and it speaks to. I think it speaks to what you said in terms of the confusion. One of the first things you said in our conversation at the conference is you said people of color are confused. I think and it speaks back to this. I'm confused. In a system of white supremacy that is designed and engineered and maintained to vault white people over people of color, that in this amazing capitalist system of ours, that there is a market that for white people to consume, to buy things that are saying this. So I think in that way, how could we help but be confused? To get back to this question around sexual partners of a person of color having a sexual partner with a white person who has admitted their own racism and white supremacy. I suppose there's grades. Certainly a white person who has acknowledged that and assumably has acknowledged everything that means is certainly far more understandable for me than a white person who denies white supremacy, who denies their participation in a racist system. I hesitate to go any further, though. Again, I don't think it's for me to sort of state, but the confusion around it, how paradoxical it is, I think is apparent, and I agree with that.
I think this could be you consciously and or unconsciously practicing racism, because we strayed very far from the question. I didn't say the white person admitted to being a racist or was in denial about that. I just said, do you see anything incorrect about a non-white person, a victim of racism, white supremacy, being in a sexual relationship with a racist white supremacist? I didn't ask for, I guess, suggestions or giving other people morals about what they should or shouldn't be engaged in. Just do you see anything incorrect in that dynamic? So I want to make sure I'm very clear about this for our listeners. I strongly suspect that was an act, conscious and or unconscious, of racism, white supremacy, because we deviated real far from what the original question was. In fact, I'll just go ahead and ask, have you engaged in sexual intercourse with a non-white person?
I have not.
Okay. Are you telling the truth?
I am telling the truth.
Okay. Yeah, I see when white people become hesitant about answering that question, that shows me a lack of commitment to replacing white supremacy with justice. Because in fact, I'll pitch it this way then. So would you be just as hesitant and not wanting to answer if the question was, do you think 1935 Nazi Germany, do you see anything incorrect about a so-called Jew having sexual intercourse with a Nazi in 1935 Germany?
I mean, there are stories of that. I don't. I hesitate again there, and whether we want to whether that is located as an act of white supremacy. It's not. I guess I just don't. I don't have it in me to sort of make pronouncements about what that means in a context I don't know.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Justice, do you have some questions you would like to ask?
What do you mean by white privilege?
When I use white privilege, I mean the benefits conveyed to white people in a white supremacist society.
What suggestions can you offer to help eliminate racism and white supremacy?
I didn't hear the first part of the question. Can you say it again?
What suggestions can you offer to help eliminate racism and white supremacy?
The greatest suggestion, again, that I feel like I can make is the need for white people working with other white people on issues of white supremacy and racism, and doing work to understand the complexity and immensity of white supremacy as a global system, as a system that is taken up and lived out by people. But the suggestion that the biggest suggestion I can make is the need for white people to work with other white people to dismantle white supremacy.
What do you mean by belief?
What do I mean by believe?
Yes.
What I really, really strongly think.
Okay, that'll be all for now.
Non-Mighty Wick, if you have... Oh, okay. Never mind. Never mind on that one. You, at the conference, well, I'll give you a story to lead in. At the conference, there was a white person, suspected racist white supremacist. She was outside, and someone passed her, and they said something to her. And she had her headphones on, so she didn't hear what they said. And she just, she said hi or something, and she just kept walking. And later on, another person asked her, did you hear what that guy said? And she said, no, I had my my headphones on. I didn't hear what he said. I just, I assumed that people, mean me well. And she kind of chuckled. And we thought about that, just like, wow, to exist in a world and to be able to think that, I just assume that people are not out to harm me. They mean me well. And we were just like, wow, I cannot fathom what that feeling would be like as a black male in a system of white supremacy. And she said, yeah, I got white privilege, I understand. She was at the conference. She had her badge on for the white privilege conference and everything. And I thought of our conversation, white privilege being able to have the feeling that people mean you well, that they are not out to harm you. Do you see a problem with that being labeled as white privilege?
I do, actually. So I think we've taken white privilege to an extent that we are confusing privileges and human rights. And the beliefs in the dignity of all people as ideals, as aspirations. If we say that rights that we would wish for all people, if we locate those as privileges in a white supremacist society, which presupposes that were we not in a white supremacist society, that people would not have, or specifically white people would not have these privileges or rights in whatever the case may be. We've run into a huge contradiction. I think to exist in a society in which you can assume that someone walking past you says something to you that you don't hear, I believe that all people deserve to exist in a society where the first inference there would not be that person meant to do me harm, that person meant to say something offensive or awful or belittling or racist to me. We all deserve that. We are all worthy of that. And to locate that as a privilege of whiteness while in a white supremacist society in this particular example, that is, I think you've illustrated that is a privilege in a white supremacist society. But it is not limited to, or in another way, that doesn't need to only happen because of white supremacy. And to continue this out a little bit, I think there's a move that a lot of white people make to sort of I think there's a lot of reasons for it, but to sort of create good white people and bad white people. And if white people have sort of worse white people, if white people have, if good white people have people who are more racist than they are that they can point to, they get to feel better about themselves. And I think a lot of I think white privilege get us into trouble there, because we start calling things privileges that we believe should be human rights, and if we conflate those two, we're actually setting white people up to fail, sort of in this context of you must give up white privilege. If part of white privilege is moving in a world where not everyone is out to harm me, if that is white privilege, I don't know anyone who's willing to give that up. At the same time, I don't think that's something that's contingent on an oppressive white supremacist society, and that's my fear of the discourse around white privilege.
Not using the most accurate terms. We talk about that a lot on this program. I know I talked about it a lot at the conference, because I feel like when you are not using the best terms to describe a problem, it becomes a lot more difficult to actually solve that problem. I feel like I witnessed that a lot at the White Privilege Conference. I think just using the term privilege sets the stage for a lot of confusion amongst non-white people. And I saw this demonstrated at the conference, where so many discussions moved to everybody has privilege. You've got 5 T-shirts and I've got 2 T-shirts, so you have privilege. You can walk and this person's in a wheelchair, so you have privilege. Even though you're a non-white person, you're 32, this white person is 60, so you have privilege. And I mean, it really, and I expected that. And I told people a year ago when I first heard about this conference, the fact that they were using the term privilege, I felt was a big problem. It's not the most accurate term. White supremacy would be much more accurate. I don't. Did you have any observations about how the term privilege,
I absolutely agree, and I witnessed that happen at the White Privilege Conference. In some ways, I think trying to as moves to make white privilege seem not so bad, because there's all these other privileges, I totally agree with you. I think using white privilege as opposed to white supremacy is for one, actually is pointing at 2 different things. White privilege are benefits conveyed to white people living in a white supremacist society. Now talking about white privilege is useful in that extent, but confusing the terms white privilege and white supremacy, or conflating the two, I absolutely agree with you that it sets us back, that it takes us away from the animating project, which is white supremacy.
Yeah, terms. That confusion, and I agree. I do think the White Privilege Conference, I do think it offers an opportunity where you can meet people from all over and discuss and have meaningful conversations. And I'm really thinking about non-white people. As I said, non-white people are very confused about racism and white supremacy. That's one of the chief weapons of maintaining this system, is to keep the victims confused. I just feel like the conference generates a lot of confusion amongst non-white people, and I feel like the term privilege is at the core of that confusion. I don't know, Justice, do you have any questions?
No, not at this moment. Thank you.
Okay. I guess before we wrap up, I wrote it down at the conference. I still got it in my notes right here. You talked about the term ally. So many of the folks are running around saying they're white allies. Can you share some of your thoughts about that term?
Yeah, I have a hard time with the term ally, as it's a war metaphor. In terms of countries being allied to others, and sort of in that way, one of the very cynical things I've thought before around this notion of allies is would you die for the person you are allied to? Since in a sort of very literal reading of that war metaphor, that's what ally means. In that way, and then even unpacking that further, a white ally, to a person of color, I see those as contradictory terms. A white ally is fraught with contradictions because of sort of how we've constructed what white means, and I think this ally term is actually is very much overused, is thrown around, is this again, is this good white person thing to be. If you're white but you're an ally, well, now you're a better white person, and I think there's just very little truth in that. Now that's not to say that there isn't work that white people can do to work towards dismantling white supremacy. But again, I don't call myself a white ally, and I reject it because of its militaristic connotations.
Terms. If you got time, I'll read this one. This is from a listener. I can read this one, and we can get ready to close out here. Cree's question is, would it be constructive to define a crime of white supremacy as an act of omission by a white person that results in a person who is not white experiencing greater harm without considering white people? Let me correct that. I'll read the question from the beginning here.
Okay.
Would it be constructive to define a crime of white supremacy as an act or omission by a white person that results in a person who is not white experiencing greater harm without considering the white person's intent, beliefs, thoughts, etc.? That is the question.
A quick response, since I know we're close to out of time here, is yes. I think intent, while a person may mean it or not, actions have consequences, and a focus on intent doesn't get at larger systemic problems. If the example I've used before on this is if I run over a person's foot and then get out of the car and explain that I didn't actually mean to run over their foot, it doesn't mean their foot's not broken. So in that way, as the question was laid out, yes, I agree. An act or omission. Yeah.
What should be the sentence of this crime?
What should be the sentence of this crime? I mean, I don't know. Is the honest answer there? Especially if we pay attention to the word omission in the question. I mean, we would exist in. I mean, every white person in this society would be locked up, I think, sort of based on that criteria. What should be the punishment? I think the punishment is the continued dehumanization of all people living in an oppressive society. I think the punishment is this mess we live in, and the continued subordination of people of color at the expense of white people fully realizing their own humanity.
Very interesting. Again, our guest, Mr. Zack Casey. I guess if do you have time for a final question?
Yeah, I've got time for like one more.
Okay, last question. At the conference, you talked about, this is, I guess, your own thoughts on the impossibility of a positive white identity. I think you saw a presentation there, and you said that it just solidifies your thoughts about the impossibility of a positive white identity. I think that would be a great one to end on. Could you kind of share that with our listeners?
Yeah, I think that to be white in a white supremacist society is to be an oppressor in a white supremacist society, and based on that, it is absolutely impossible to be a white person and have a positive white racial identity. I say that and ground that in the history of the term white, the history of what European ethnic groups in moving to the United States did to become white, and what the continued existence of white supremacy means for anyone in this society who calls themselves white. The impossibility there, I think, is something we have to acknowledge. The impossibility of a positive white racial identity is what allows us to stop the questions of or the divide of the good white people and the bad white people. It is impossible, to have a positive white racial identity, and the quest to find that, to me, takes us away from the more important project of dismantling white supremacy. I think again, part of existing as a white person in a white supremacist society is there are many ways in which white people choose to define themselves, and I will not make the statement that there is nothing redeemable, that there is nothing of worth in white people. I won't make that claim. But trying to locate their racial selves in a positive light, I think takes us away from dismantling white supremacy.
Mr. Zack Casey, I'm not sure what people's thoughts are on the program. I always tell folks, scrutinize. Do not just assume that anybody I bring here is constructive or has worthwhile information, but scrutinize. Really think about what has been shared, and use what you can. If you didn't think it was constructive, I apologize. Move forward and find a program that has constructive information. But I am very thankful that you took some time out to share a bit of your Saturday evening. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation at the White Privilege Conference and had expectations that it would be pretty solid, and I thought this discussion was excellent. Would love to have you back on the program.
Zack?
Yeah. Oh,
Zack?
Sure.
Yeah. Are you still with us, Zack? Okay, yeah. I just wanted to get clarity. It sounds like you were saying, like, I guess the system of white supremacy is punishment for the crime of racism. Just, I guess, white people living in it being dehumanizing. Most white people I've talked to, admitted racists, they say it's like being white in the system of white supremacy is like high-octane coffee. I was just wondering, like, what's different in your world, or in what you see as far as the system?
What's different for me, I suppose, is, and again, I don't think this is actually that different from a lot of white folks. I think to be white in a white supremacist society means we do something we know is wrong because of who we are, because of what we've learned about who we are. As I said at the beginning of the show, the example I've used is, in the act of buying coffee, I have participated in the maintenance of global white supremacy, and so the cost in that way, and I by no means am trying to make a statement that it is in any way the same or even comparable in many ways to the experience of people of color in a white supremacist society. But the punishment, to me, is the lack of realizing an authentically human existence, an authentically human self, a way of being that I can imagine but can't get to. That's how I'd respond.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Try and wrap this again. Definitely would enjoy having you back on the broadcast again, exchange views. I definitely want to hear, because he's doing some work scrutinizing some of the so-called anti-racists as that project develops. I would definitely love to hear more about it. And maybe we can even hash out on the air some of the ideas we were talking about for that workshop for White Privilege 12 next year.
We'll definitely be talking about it.
For sure. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening, and I will be in touch very soon, sir.
Likewise. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Enjoy. Woo. Context of white supremacy, for sure. Whoops. Wrong button. Excuse. I'm going to play Mr. Williams' commercial if I have the opportunity. The switchboard doesn't crash on me. Okay, there we go.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At CounterRacism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by CounterRacism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and Justice. Justice, did you want to give out your email address?
Yes, justice.asap@yahoo.com. Again, justice.asap@yahoo.com.
Groovy. Did you have any other thoughts you wanted to share?
No, well, it's a great show. It was constructive. I think he could have lowered the vocabulary level some, even though when you told him lower the vocabulary level.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Perhaps I should have prompted a little more about vocabulary. I'll keep that in mind. You used to say that. I used to do that on the show, but then when you arrived, you used to do that. You would give them the explanation at the beginning. Please lower your vocabulary and speak so that a 10-year-old can understand you. That was like great intro to the program, I thought. Maybe we should both do that. If you do it and I do it, maybe that'll put more pressure on them to speak clearly.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll keep that in mind as we go. Pressure on them to try to speak clearly. Was it anything else? Anything else you wanted to share?
Nope.
Okie dokie. Yeah, perhaps we'll have him back on the program. We'll have to see. He might not want to chat with us anymore. He is an admitted racist, so who knows. But I thought it was constructive. He was consistent. I got to give him that. Big kudos. He was very consistent. He pretty much said everything that we talked about in Wisconsin. So I thought it was constructive there. I don't know. You all can judge for yourselves and see what you think. But I thought it was constructive. I wish more white people could at least be honest and consistent in that manner with what they say. That would be very helpful. We will be back Monday. It's not entered yet, so you don't see it, but we'll be back on Monday. Monday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific. Sister Nefertari, she will be on the program. She's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She has a great lecture on the conflict that has been generated amongst non-white people that causes us to bicker with one another, light complexion, dark complexion. Great presentation on that, as well as some of the other work that she is doing, particularly with non-white younger folks in the Philadelphia area. Again, that will be this Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific. This was a recommendation from the Irritated Genie. So if you heard that broadcast earlier this month, tune in on Monday, April 19th. Cree's program, she will be broadcasting live tomorrow afternoon, 3 p.m. Pacific. Excuse me. Do that again. Cree will be broadcasting live tomorrow afternoon. It'll be 3 p.m. Eastern. There we go. 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 12 noon Pacific. Dark Matter will be on her program live from the United Kingdom. Should be very constructive. I will be there. I don't know if I'll be in the chat room, but I'll be listening live. I might have an eye on the chat room to see what folks are talking about, but I should be listening live. Dark Matter, Cree, non-white females being constructive in their fight against racism, white supremacy tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. Please check the blog as well, cree7.wordpress.com. Again, cree7.wordpress.com. Also check Back of the Buses blog, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. That address again, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. Again, as I said, we'll be back on Monday evening. Should be constructive. Hope we had 2 constructive shows today. If not, please find a more constructive broadcast to tune into. We don't want to waste time. We want to get this problem solved. I did want to read one comment a non-white listener mailed to me during the broadcast. She was commenting about Mr. Casey saying that he did not think the problem of racism, white supremacy could be solved if white people do not participate in eliminating white supremacy. And she said that perhaps he thinks white people are superior humans or something. That was her comment while she was listening to that. She thought that was just very interesting, as did I. I also thought that was very interesting. Yeah, and as I said, I don't agree. As a non-white person, I do not agree because I don't think white people are going to replace white supremacy with justice. I don't think there's any evidence that would suggest white people are interested in doing so. And if that's true, non-white people are going to have to solve this problem. I agree the problem is with white people. White people are doing incorrect things worldwide to maintain the system, but I believe non-white people can solve this problem. As I believe Cree has written on her page, it's about evolving the will and the ability to do so. I hope this program is constructive in that effort, and I hope that I'm correct, because we're wasting time. If white people got to participate in this, we might be wasting our time. I don't know, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case, and I don't think we need to rely on white people to solve this problem. I think we can do it. At any rate, we'll be back on Monday evening. Thank you for tuning in. I hope it was constructive. Context of white supremacy, and replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Thank you. And we will be back Monday evening. Tune in. Thanks.